Good morning. It's fantastic to see so many people showing up at 9 o'clock in the morning to consider the state of science education in America and in Pennsylvania. My job is to introduce the three smart women here on stage with me and then get out of the way. But first, I'm going to lay out a little bit of context. First, my name's Gordon Tom. I'm a senior fellow with the Commonwealth Foundation. And as some of you probably already know, the Commonwealth Foundation is a free market think tank based in Harrisburg. It has long been known for promoting things like school choice and limited government. More recently, with energy becoming a dominant issue, the organization has increased its focus in that area, hiring a full-time person to, among other things, manage the narrative around Governor Shapiro's flirtation with things like carbon taxes and subsidies, all those things that will surely, almost guaranteed, to raise the price of energy and to decrease the supply of energy, the reliability of the supply. Excuse me. Recent Commonwealth Foundation articles in places like National Review, Daily Caller, and Pennsylvania media have addressed some of these subjects, as well as President Biden's own woeful energy policy. Now, being policy-driven, the Commonwealth Foundation does not get into the science underlying these issues. However, the CO2 Coalition, represented by these three speakers, does very much. The coalition was formed about 9 years ago. It's based in Arlington, Virginia. It educates the public and policymakers on carbon dioxide's role in nature and its benefits as a plant food and as a positive moderator of global temperatures. The organization has about 160 volunteer members from nearly every scientific discipline you can imagine, and includes among these members is the 2022 Nobel laureate in physics, 2 members of the National Academies of Sciences. The chairman of the board is a professor emeritus at Princeton University in physics. Gregory Wrightstone, who's in the audience, will be a speaker. Gregory Wrightstone is the executive director of the coalition. He'll be speaking this afternoon. The coalition's unofficial slogan is, "We love CO2 and so should you." So that's about all I don't really need to say anymore. In addition to explicating the facts about carbon dioxide, this morning's speakers are engaged in advancing the scientific method and the critical thinking that method provides. The scientific method they regard as a tool in the search for truth. As you will hear the speakers say, their work is in response to the education establishment's replacement of this method in favor of pseudoscience and indoctrination. They will discuss not only their work, but how educators have been responding to it. Now let me introduce the speakers. Sharon Camp is a senior education advisor for the CO2 Coalition, and she's very popular here in the front, and a creator of the lesson plans for the Coalition's CO2 Learning Center. She has worked in industry, the United States Environmental Protection Agency, and as an advanced placement environmental science teacher. And she has been a reader, also known as a grader, for the annual AP Environmental Science exam. Sharon has a bachelor's degree in geology and a PhD in analytical chemistry. Our next speaker will be Rafaella Nascimento, a native of Brazil. She's vice chairman of the CO2 Coalition's board of directors. She's president and founder of C Intelligence, the letter C Intelligence, a company that develops nanomaterials in various scientific fields for high-tech companies, and is the inventor of numerous intellectual properties. She's the founder of an organization dedicated to creating educational materials for Brazilians. Rafaella has a PhD in chemistry and has performed postdoctoral training. And our final speaker will be Angela Wheeler. She's the CO2 She's the CO2 Coalition's Vice President of Marketing and Multimedia. She has served as Marketing and Publications Director for both the Capital Media Group, which is a DC-based news and media firm, and the Free Congress Research and Education Foundation, a conservative think tank founded by Paul Weyrich. Angela is also a former science teacher, and adding to her credentials as an educator, Angela is the mother of 7 children, ages 8 to 30. There you go, that deserves some applause, right? We all can appreciate that. So let me now, at this point, turn to Sharon Camp and let her take over the program from here.
Good morning, everyone. See if we can get that PowerPoint up for me, please. So the state of science education in the United States has taken kind of an ugly turn with the introduction of the next generation science standards. And so one of the things that the CO2 Coalition wanted to do was to get involved in making science education materials which we're gearing toward elementary through middle school and primarily homeschoolers, charter schools, and magnet schools, if they're interested in them, to come with true, honest science written by scientists. And the CO2 Coalition has got an amazing group of scientists and economists and business people and people across the entire spectrum to use as resources for this. And Angela will be talking about that in a lot more detail shortly. So school choice in America has become very, very popular with the states, especially since people have discovered that things are not quite so well in the public education system. And this was brought to everybody's attention during the lockdowns for COVID. So parents are becoming more concerned about exactly what is being covered in the schools. There are 33 states that have school choice legislation and 45 that permit public charter, 50 states permit magnet schools, 50 states permit homeschooling. Pennsylvania allows all 3. They also provide a state tax credit scholarship for educational improvement and educational opportunity. So there are a lot of people in Pennsylvania that clearly are interested in taking the education of their children into their own hands. So there's been a huge school in homeschooling. 3.7 million students now are being homeschooled in grades 0 through middle school. Mostly middle school seems to be the highest one, with North Carolina, Florida, and Georgia all having the highest percentage of homeschoolers. So why would you homeschool for education? Because there are a lot of people that aren't particularly knowledgeable about science or even comfortable about science, and part of that has to do with the dismal science education that a lot of us received when we were in elementary school. We've taken little kids who are normally natural investigators, and by the time they get into high school, they hate science. So somewhere along the way, we're failing our children, and probably failed you in the past as well. However, it's gotten a lot worse now. The schools no longer teach the scientific method. They now have replaced that with what they call science and engineering practices, which I'll talk about as being completely different. They also no longer teach critical thinking. And so this is where the indoctrination part comes in, excuse me, where they tell the students not how to think, but what to think. And this is a huge problem because learning how to think is so easily taught in science, but they are not doing it anymore. And of course, now all of us are becoming suspicious that this is on purpose. So to try to take that into their own hands, parents have decided, well, you know, I'm just gonna bring you home. You know, we'll figure out how to do it on our own. So public education really seems to have become much more interested in indoctrination than they have in education. And there's no area that's this more true than in science. So the next generation science standards were standards that are presently used by 45 states in the country, including the state of Pennsylvania. It does not include the scientific method. It was purposefully left out. And it does not include critical thinking skills. Now, the interesting thing about why it was intentionally left out is because the argument was that it requires the use of a hypothesis and experimentation in a lab, and not every scientist will approach a problem in the same way. And so they'll take out subjects like geology, for example, where you can't really set up how does plate tectonics work in a lab, or some kind of an ecology study where you really have to do it out in the field, and they'll use this as a justification for not teaching the scientific method. It is a way of approaching a problem. It's a way of coming up with a question and possible choices for the outcome, and then seeing if your choices work. I mean, my mechanic uses the scientific method when he's trying to figure out what's wrong with my car. So it's very widely applicable, and again, is a way of thinking. It also requires an understanding of the difference between pure science and applied science. So when they replace engineering practices with the scientific method, they're taking pure science and replacing it with applied science. So let's talk about what the difference is there for a minute. The best way I can explain this is the difference between a chemist and a chemical engineer. So a chemist goes in the laboratory and tries to come up with some kind of a process. And it could be some kind of a pharmaceutical. It could be a way to identify different compounds. My thesis research was trying to identify unknown products in a North Carolina river that water was turning pink because of the effluent from carpet manufacturers. You know, what is this stuff? How do you detect it, so on and so forth. Excuse me. Once the chemist has designed a process, the chemical engineer's job is to scale it up to manufacturing. So let's say that you've discovered this brand new type of glue, adhesive, and you want to bring it to market. The the chemical engineer, is the one who's going to scale it up to the industrial production. He already knows what it is you want to do. He's just got to find some way to do it. Okay? But it's the scientist, the chemist, that does all the research, figures out the chemical reactions that are involved, and comes up with the actual process. So there's the difference in thinking right there. And that should tell you something, because what they want these students to do is, instead of thinking for themselves, is to accept a given piece of information as fact and then work from there, instead of trying to determine, is this really a fact or is it just bad science? And so that's the problem. So the next generation science standards are the standards that are written for K through 12 education. And they are expectations for what students are expected to be able to do. So when I started teaching, back when the dinosaurs roamed the planet, they threw a book at me and said, "Here, teach this." Like, sure, no problem. How far am I supposed to go? What do you want me to cover? How fast should I cover the material? What are my kids supposed to be doing? You'll figure it out, right? So the whole idea of standards was to help teachers around the country be able to come up with, okay, this is what we're going to do and this is how we're going to do it. And then the selling point for the next generation science standards was, okay, if I live in Pennsylvania and I move to Georgia, for example, instead of having to learn a brand new curriculum and be in a different pace and so on and so forth, everybody will be on the same page. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Okay. And then they also said, well, this is terrific because you've got big organizations like the National Academy of Sciences and the American Association for the Advancement of Science and the National Science Teachers Association. All these people are supposed to know so much about science, and they're going to get in there and they're going to write the standards, and it's going to be great. And what we didn't realize is what they all had an agenda, and they were slowly but surely implementing it. So what are the components? It's a little complicated. They have 3 different parts that they refer to. One is what they call the cross-cutting concept. And this is like just the core information. This is the concept you're supposed to understand. Then the science and engineering practices is what they've replaced with the scientific method. Okay, this is what you're going to be able to do once you understand this core concept. Excuse me, the disciplinary, even I get confused. Disciplinary core ideas those are the main science concepts. And then the cross-cutting concepts are where you're going to find this in different areas throughout the science curriculum. So they're trying to, instead of the way we used to do it, which was, you'd study 1 unit of biology maybe, and then a unit of physical science. They're trying to bring it all together so that the areas overlap will be covered as overlapping areas. Again, it doesn't sound like it's a bad idea, but they've left out the scientific method. So the scientific method then is discouraged because not all inquiries require the use of a hypothesis, which I strongly disagree with. Every scientific investigation starts off with a question. Not all inquiries occur in the lab, but that doesn't mean you can't use the scientific method to figure it out. Not all inquiries require solutions. So you'll see in the standards, I'll have some up there, solve this problem. It's like, that's the engineering part, It's like, I'm not here to solve the problem. I'm here to identify what's going on. What's the science fact that's going on? And it doesn't include models. The scientific method does not include models, okay? And so part of this is to sell the whole ideas of models, which is one of the biggest problems. So if we take a look at these are the list of things that they consider to be the science and engineering practices. And in nowhere do they have anything about a hypothesis. They say, ask questions and define problems. So in a scientific inquiry, you always come up with a hypothesis. It's not just asking questions, it's to ask a specific question, and then to design an experiment to find an answer to that question. And some of these look like, part of the scientific method, and they are. Engage in argument from evidence, obtain and educate, communicate information, be able to explain what's going on and why. But they've left out the key part of the scientific method, which is independent thinking. So this is what the next generation science standards look like. You've got the 3 different colors at the bottom represent the disciplinary core whatevers. I'm sorry, can't read it from here. Stuff. The engineering practices, I think, is in blue, and the cross-cutting concepts are in green, and then the core ideas are in orange. And then you've got all of these standards that the students are supposed to do. This is what they have to be able to accomplish if they have learned the material. And I just pulled one out of the air, matter and energy in organisms and ecosystems. MS stands for middle school. And I think the question was about photosynthesis, okay? So I know that you can't read that, but I wanted to show you what it looks like if you pull up the next generation science standards on a slide. This is what the specific instructions are. Use a model, construct a model, give evidence based on a model. So now we've got not this search for empirical information, it's all based on models. And if you take a look at a lot of the science, and I'm going to use that term loosely, research in magazines, they'll all say, this model, okay? So let's define exactly what a model is. There are 2 different types of models. There's a predictive model, And then there's a model that's used to explain a concept, an abstract concept. So an example would be styrofoam balls and toothpicks to represent the shape of a molecule. That's a model, okay? But the predictive ones are the ones that they want the students to use. And the predictive ones we could think of as being like a weather model, okay? They have to have supercomputers for weather models. The weather models can predict with accuracy 3 days in advance, 5 days if they're lucky. Anything past then, don't even bother to look at it because it's not going to be accurate. The model is only as good as the information that you put into it. And when you're looking at extremely complicated systems like weather or climate, you don't know all the parameters. Here's another trick. They leave out parameters that will give the wrong information. So for example, we know for a fact that water is the major greenhouse gas in the atmosphere, and that it is the one thing that one of the main things that determines climate around the world, and clouds are equally important. But the climate models don't include either. So is that oversight, or is that because they don't want to? And so now we start to look at why the use of modeling is so important, because they can come up with a model, tell the kids, okay, this is what's real. I want you to base all your arguments on this model. So this is from the Pennsylvania Integrated Standards for Science, Engineering, Environment, and Ecology. It is verbatim what I just showed you in the NGSS, okay? So, just a really quick thing before I turn the podium over. I hope I've left you ladies enough time. So this was a particularly interesting article. Jonathan Osborne, Professor Emeritus of Education at Stanford University, which actually has gotten kind of a black eye the last few months, but his proclamation is that the goal of science is the achievement of consensus. And if anybody is a scientist, they understand that scientists argue with each other about concepts all the time, constantly. But that's how it grows. You don't reach consensus necessarily unless it's something that nobody argues with, like photosynthesis, which sounds really super simple, but when you start getting into the chemistry, they even argue over that, okay? So how does this work with our reception by the National Science Teachers Association? And for that, I'm going to turn the podium over to my colleague, Dr. Rafaella Nascimento. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. So, forgive me my English, I'm Brazilian, so you bear with me with my accent. If the goal of science is the achievement of consensus, what is the science for? That's the main question. Why we are even here? As English is not my first language, I was looking what consensus mean. And it's a generally accepted opinion or decision among a group of people. National Science, NSTA talks about consensus of climate change and therefore climate crisis. According with the NSTA, there is no controversy about the climate change and the fact that there is a climate crisis. And the main question is how we mitigate the damage, how we address the social, how we fight, or how we empower the students to understand the urgency to deal with the climate change and therefore be better citizens. For example, it's as if your children are framed. In Brazil, we understand that very well because we have this government telling us what you should think, how you should deal with your children, right? So the fact that they say, the NSTA states that the scientific community agrees with the climate change and climate crisis, it's a type of framing because they basically remove what Sharon just said about scientists arguing with each other about concepts and therefore advancing, and say everybody has a consensus about this and we should just address the problem. Because of that, the CO2 Coalition decided to go to the NSTA convention because if we're going to talk, let's talk with them. And we wrote this book, this article, Challenging NSTA. And the problem was, when we went there, the teachers were, many of them were eager to receive documents, books that were not framed. And many teachers told us that they have to state what the NSTA say because otherwise they lose their job. And one of the things is that the NSTA expel us, but I will go in that route very soon. They say, the NSTA in this document, they say that there is a cumulative weight of scientific evidence that indicates the climate is changing. Think about this. Cumulative weight, what that even means. How that is scientific valid. It's not. And if they say all this evidence, it's enough for the students to go and try to understand the climate change and therefore how they will fight the climate change, they also advocate for integrating all the climate change and the climate and climate change science across the K-12 curriculum. So that is another way to use different fields out of the science to indoctrinate the children and instigate fear, because then you have the social part. Then you have different people basically coming to your children and telling them, there is a climate crisis. You should be afraid. You should act right now. Does anyone remember Greta? I don't need to go there, right? Yeah, I have seen that. So the other part is, because NSTA highlights the models, and let me tell you, I'm a chemist, I am a lab person. We test things, right? I had many people come in with models and telling me, this reaction does not work. And I go to the lab, and it works. You know why? Because they cannot address in one model all the steps that we have to go through to prepare certain things. And that's the same problem when you highlight models that use scientific consensus. Keyword again, consensus, right? It's opinion. Basically, what they are saying is, here is the truth, and therefore we just have to talk about this. However, consensus, again, has no role in the scientific method, let alone in critical thinking, because the students are not even asked to question anything, because that's the status quo, and therefore you have to work with that. We have an expression in my country, forgive me if I use that, but your model is as good as your thinking. If you don't think well, oops, but never mind, right? That's the point. And the other part related to the NSTA standards is that they would like the students to address strategies to mitigate the climate change. Think about that. your children, again, will be thinking of strategies how to mitigate the climate change, the sacrifice. It doesn't matter the cost, right? We need to do it as soon as possible. It's what they say. But at the CO2 Coalition, we understand that CO2, it's good for the planet. It's the core of our planet. And the reason we have a C on the name of my company is the intelligence that comes from carbon, right? It's a little trick, so people know. And the point is that more CO2, you have more crops, you have a slightly warming, but that's very good. I lived in Canada for 9 years of my life. Any warmth would be great for us there. So I would like to tell you, yes, we love CO2, and so should you. And I would like to tell you a quick story about how we end up being ejected from an STA, because it's fun, right? We went there. We had all the books. Angela will talk about this. She has the books to show the videos, lesson plans. The teachers were enjoying, and parents were enjoying the fact that there were people there talking about science without bias, without indoctrination. However, when many of other teachers saw these documents, they didn't like it. And STA didn't like it. How dare you challenge us, right? But again, we are scientists. We challenge each other. It's part of who we are. And they ask us, either you get rid of this document or you will be out. And Gregory Redstone right here say, okay, we are not giving an inch, and therefore we will not get rid of our document. So they invite us out. They call the security. It was interesting. As a new immigrant, I was quite something. And I have to tell you, I do not regret. I do not regret the smearing campaigns that came after. Thank you, Washington Post. You are great. You call us climate deniers. Well, we had other groups telling even worse things, The Independent and so on. So I would let you with this thinking from my own country, okay? If you don't fight for your children, who will do that? You will let your own children go in survival mode as it happened in my country? They lose all their critical thinking? Is that what we are going about? I encourage each and every one of you, go to our booth and see what we have and look if there is indoctrination in our material. You will see that it's plain science. We like what we are doing, and most of us here are in a mission. And talking about mission, I would like to call now the person that runs the show most of the time, Angela Wheeler. She will talk about the CO2 Learning Center. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nascimento, and thank you, Gordon, for the very nice introduction. It is so nice to be here in the beautiful state of Pennsylvania. My 8th grade daughter asked me last night if I was nervous to speak in front of such a large group, and I said, yes, I'm a little bit nervous, but I'm going to be speaking with people who love America and people who believe that truth matters. And I thank you for that. And my colleagues and I are here today to talk about truth in science education and why it matters. The CO2 Coalition, let's see if I need to get to the next slide, thank you. The CO2 Coalition was established in 2015 as a nonpartisan science educational organization. Our primary education focus is about the important contribution of carbon dioxide in our world. The CO2 Coalition currently has 160 members, to include many scientists, physicists, chemists, geologists, and more, as well as economists, engineers, computer scientists, and energy experts. Our members are all noteworthy in their fields of expertise and include such impressive names as Dr. William Happer, our chairman, Princeton Professor Emeritus, Dr. John Clauser, a 2022 Nobel laureate in physics, and Dr. Patrick Moore, co-founder of Greenpeace. As Gordon mentioned, I am the Vice President of Marketing and Multimedia at the CO2 Coalition. I was recently promoted and given that title, and I will say I am truly honored, but not because of the title, but because of the people that gave me the title, that I admire so much and get to work with every day. My main purpose in being here today is to tell you about our awesome CO2 Learning Center. In 2019, about 15 members of the CO2 Coalition formed an education committee because they were concerned about the state of science education in America. They were concerned that information about carbon dioxide was not honest, was not true. We were concerned about science education in American schools and included in taxpayer-funded curricula because it included indoctrination and encouraged students to follow consensus science and groupthink. Our objective was to assist educators by providing materials that teach the importance of carbon dioxide and the scientific method and critical thinking skills. This image is from our new CO2learningcenter.com website. The caricatures, these are mostly the leaders of the team, but if you go to our About page, you'll see that our incredible visual arts advisor, Tiago Hellinger, has created caricatures for each of our members, and they're really fun. Our team members mostly hold PhDs or advanced degrees, and 2 members are members of the National Academy of Sciences. Our education committee meets every 2 weeks, and all of the members contribute their time and their effort and expertise so that we can provide credible science materials to educators and students. Now I'll tell you a little bit about the materials that we have available at the CO2 Learning Center. Dr. Nascimento here, she works with Tiago, our visual arts designer, to do all the drawings for the books and the videos. She helps him with the science so that everything is very scientifically accurate, and she works with him very closely from start to finish on every project. So thank you, Rafaella, for your efforts. And Dr. Camp, she creates our very excellent and thorough lesson plans. And she includes wonderful activity suggestions, and everyone who sees these are so impressed. We hope you'll stop by our table to see them. And when we've been going to these homeschool conventions and conventions meeting teachers, and when they look at our materials, they say, "You even have lesson plans?" And so thank you, Dr. Camp, for your efforts. The first book in our first series is Once Upon a Time, the true story about the miracle molecule carbon dioxide. This book discusses what is CO2, why CO2 is necessary for life on Earth, and that increasing CO2 makes plants grow faster and stronger. All books are written by Dr. Gordon Fulks, a member of our education committee, who is a retired astrophysicist. So sometimes I say, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to write a book about carbon dioxide, but we have one. The second book in this series is Simon the Solar-Powered Cat. And this book teaches students that plants store energy from the sun, that photosynthesis uses carbon dioxide and water to make food, and that food contains energy from the sun, so animals are solar-powered, which children think that's really cool too when you think about that. And we're finding that children really like Simon, the character Simon, and this is a little bit of a spoiler alert, but there's one part in this book where Simon dresses like a ninja cat to go sneak some food from the barn next door. The third book in this series is The Magic Mirror, Reflections on Recycling. We take a little bit of a different approach to recycling that maybe most Americans think of. We teach in this book that nature is the most important recycler, and that nature and man-made processes break all materials down into carbon dioxide and water. The first 3 books we have at our table, we have some packets prepared that have the first 3 books and a lesson plan, and we would love for you to stop by and pick up a packet and get my card and let me know if you have a charter school or homeschooler that might be interested in these books. And I also want to add that we have 2 new books coming to this series. We have The Big Bad Wolf that discusses the basics of climate and the truth about climate, and Mystery of the Night Raiders, which discusses the scientific method. And the girls, the characters in the book, they must use these steps and critical thinking to solve the mystery. And now to our videos. We also have videos. The first video that we produced is Gases in the Air. It's the first of 5 that we offer at co2learningcenter.com and also on our YouTube channel, CO2 Learning Center. As I mentioned, our visual arts director, Tiago Hellinger, provides illustration and animations for our videos. Our education committee chairman, Payne Kilborn, has worked closely with Tiago and Rafaella on all the details of each video. Payne couldn't make it here today, but I would like to give a shout out to him for all that he does for our education committee and for keeping our projects running so smoothly. Our second video, Gases Come Alive, describes the major gaseous components in air. It also describes how these components are used by life, providing a thorough explanation of photosynthesis. The third video we created is Where the Gases Come From. This teaches how CO2 is formed, what percentage of the air is CO2, and how CO2 is used by plants. Our fourth video switches to water. It is the magic molecule, part 1, and it teaches what a water molecule is and the properties of water. Our fifth video is the magic molecule part 2, and this video teaches how water plays an important role in moving heat around the earth and how water helps make our weather and climate livable. We have the magic molecule part 3 coming very soon and more awesome videos in the works. We also, as we talk to a lot of teachers, these are short videos. They're about 4 minutes. A new video that we're creating, Life Loves Warmth, is longer, probably about 20 minutes or so. But we talk to educators and they say, this is so great because we also have the lesson plans that go along. So the students can watch, you can pause, and then the educator has the lesson plans that help teach as you go along with watching the videos. And that brings me to my next slide, lesson plans and activities. As I mentioned, at co2learningcenter.com, you can find all of our lesson plans, and they include learning standards and goals, background information for instructors, suggested activities, formative and summative questions. And as I mentioned, all were created by Dr. Sharon Camp, who, as you can tell, she knows her stuff. And she has done an excellent job with the lesson plans, and I hope that you all have an opportunity to go to our website and look through our lesson plans. A very popular section of our CO2learningcenter.com website is our fun facts section. There are 10 fun facts included, and then when you flip the card over, it tells more information and provides credible sources. Our climate quiz is also very popular at the CO2learningcenter.com. As of now, it has 18 commonly held misconceptions about climate change. I'd be interested for all of you to go to CO2learningcenter.com climate quiz and take the quiz for yourself and see if you understand all of the questions. And then the great thing is all of these have sources, and so you just don't have to take our word for it. There's a lot of sources provided. So I guess that's the end of ours. And in conclusion, I would just like to say, if you're concerned about science education in Pennsylvania, the CO2 Coalition and the CO2 Learning Center have incredible resources for you. Last year alone, we distributed more than 5,000 print books, as well as many lesson plans. We attended 2 conferences for science teachers, one in Texas and one in Georgia. We also attended our first homeschool conference in Atlanta, Georgia. And this year, we'll be attending conventions providing free materials for all in California, Florida, Georgia, and Texas. And I would like to note that as a nonprofit organization, we provide all of our materials at no cost to educators, whether you're a public school, private school, homeschool educator. And so right now we're targeting homeschool groups and charter schools and private schools because they're free to have the science materials that they want. But what we're finding, as Rafaella mentioned, we're finding that a lot of public school teachers are saying these materials won't be welcome in our school. If I bring this to my school, I'm going to get fired. So that's another problem that we'll have to address. But as of now, we're trying to get all of our materials to charter schools, private schools, and homeschool groups. And we provide them at no charge with a lot of resources. And I would like to close by telling you about a wonderful new series that is coming soon. The series is being written by our CO2 Coalition Executive Director, Gregory Wrightstone. Some of you may be familiar with him, a former Pennsylvanian. The first book, Chloe the Clownfish Sleeps Well, is part of a series for younger children, toddler to about 2nd grade, with beautiful storybook images by Tiago Hellinger that tells a comforting story that the Great Barrier Reef is doing quite well. The book's message goes along with a CO2 Coalition billboard that some of you may have seen driving down the Pennsylvania Turnpike, and it says, "Sleep well, there is no climate crisis."
We have a few minutes for questions. We have an eager man right here in the front.
Yeah, my name's Ed Mackow. I'm a physicist too, and former teacher. I taught for 10 years. And when I was a student, I always asked questions. And I didn't have the courage where I would try and teach my children like homeschooling. But if I had the courage to have homeschooling, I would teach them, like in the summer, a little bit, and I'd give them the courage to go to school and bring this stuff to the teachers. And ask the teachers the question. Because the teachers are afraid to be thrown out, and then the student knows enough that he can bring the fear of the teacher. I would work with the teachers first before I would do the homeschooling. school. You can always do homeschooling in the summer after school. The question of the shelter is they're afraid of being thrown out of school. They question the teacher. So if you're backing up their children, you're willing to homeschool them, then the children could have the courage to ask the questions to the teacher, and then bringing material to the teacher and trying to educate. Here's the problem. In Central Gulf, Selene School District, the commissioners have a lawsuit. The big New York firm is going to give them 1/3 of the money for suing the oil company on the basis of this climate change stuff. So they want to put all the oil companies out of business. We already have $1 trillion a year we're paying on interest on the debt from this climate change hoax. It's costing us $1 trillion a year. We're paying $3 trillion a year. We owe. And under President Trump, we were only spending $500 billion a year. Now it's
All right.
and unless President Trump is reelected, and or someone like him regains that we produce energy.
Let me interrupt, sir.
If we don't produce anything, we pay back the debt.
Good. Thank you very much for your thoughts. Thank you.
Let the kids go to fight first.
Yeah.
And then teach them. Try
Very
and
good.
teach the schools. Don't let them.
Have any thoughts on this?
Let them take over and run the thing.
Well, you want to talk?
Do you have a question?
Yeah, good question. Are you guys aware of the Pennsylvania Senate Bill 831 on carbon capture sequestration? And what are your thoughts on carbon capture sequestration?
No, but we do have a group of people headed up again by our fearless leader to address any kind of issue that you could bring up against the Senate. So what I recommend that you do is talk to Mr. Wrightstone and see if maybe he can get a committee of people together for you, because we do publications to support the people who are going against legislation.
Actually, we have an expert in carbon sequestration. Byron was PhD. It's a PhD and a postdoc. He developed some of these techniques, and he came to the light, as we say, and he understood that was not interesting. As a person that works with different companies, I know that carbon sequestration is not, first of all, it's scientifically incorrect, but for the economy, it's not viable anyway, because why you would invest so many taxpayer money in such techniques? That's, I think you should use in a different priority.
Carbon capture sequestration is a problem or a solution looking for a problem.
Right.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
It's a solution looking for a problem.
Yes.
Yeah. I actually just read a draft of an article by one of the chemical engineers on staff who points out that it's very expensive, very difficult to do, and if you put it on a power plant, for instance, it reduces the efficiency by 1/4. So the costs are enormous. I had one question. We're out of time. Well, thank you very much. Final applause for our speakers, please.